Yeah, that looks like a lot of fun. I'm not the swing guy. I might do the zip line, but not that swing. Oh, listen, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing Michelle to step into this position. As lead pastor here, I kind of oversee the staff. So allowing her to step into this position actually gives me a little power and control over her, and I've never had that. So thank you for allowing me to experience that. Yeah, it's already feeling great. Like I can fire her. I don't know, like that's empowering, yeah. I think I told you some time ago that I had this great conversation with my kids when they were smaller, and it started in the line at Taco Bell, and we are huge Taco Bell fans. I know that's kind of our toxic trait, if you will. It's just late night too. I mean, Sophie's always like, hey, she'll text me and it'll just say, TB, question mark? And I'm like, yeah, let's hit the road. So, I mean, anybody else? Chicken quesadilla? Burrito Supreme. Yeah, there's a handful of us, a little cult going on. Okay, Taco Bell cult. Love the stuff. And in this drive-through, the topic of the talk came up, and it came out that my kids thought that the talk referenced some kind of government conspiracy or ninjas. So that led to a conversation back home where Michelle and I just chilled on the living room furniture and allowed our children to ask any question they wanted, and we just talked about the talk. And that spilled over into a series of what I call round one, round two, with Christian, and just going all in and talking about this stuff in detail. And I think I left you with the note that I was so glad that I took that step to have that talk at a young age. Because if you don't, chances are time's going to slip by, and you'll find yourself in living with a teenager or a college student or a young adult, and you've never had the talk. So when the idea of dating come into our family, our children might be dating, this is really live on the scene. I had this peace inside of me that I didn't have to scramble and then start talking about this or whip something up. No, it had been a conversation. And that transitioned into this deal where I was just geeking out. I don't know about you, what you got. Maybe it's games or history or tech or something. But I geek out on leadership. So I had some high energy going with those talks. They were really successful. And my wife, she's just so good. She entertains just anything, crazy brainstorming idea that I come to her. So I come with this whiteboard, and she and I sit in the living room like, hey, I want us to do a values audit. She's like, okay, I'm in. What's a values audit? And I'm like, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this whiteboard, it's a typical 3x5. Here's your marker, here's my marker. We're just going to write words that we think are super duper important to a family. Super important. We're going to write every word we think of. Then we're going to put it away. We're going to come back a couple of days later, and we're going to look at those words, and we're going to start refining that list and saying, okay, this is good, but it kind of works with this word, and this word assumes this word. So we started refining, restricting the list, and then we're whittling it down. And we reach 4 words, and we're like, yes, we feel good about those, we pray about them, and they've been our family values for several years now. We're just operating with those, and the decisions we make and the direction we take, we try to operate out of those values. And it has been the most satisfying and rewarding thing for me as a father and husband in the family. And it's simply the idea of being intentional. And every family doesn't have to do it. But what I learned from that process is that we're still going to make mistakes. But the thing was, we were intentionally creating a family culture. It wasn't passive. It didn't just happen. We didn't wake up one day and realize, wait, we really missed this. No, there were steps and stages and check-in points. And so through premarital counseling, and anytime I work with families, especially young families, with young children, I sort through that stuff, and it's the most beneficial thing you can do is actually be intentional with your family. Now, caveat, when we walk through this 2-part series that we're starting today, Insta Family, and if you're reading that, heading there, Insta Family, it's not like Instapot, okay? It's not like you throw a few ingredients and boom, there's your family. It's more like Instagram. There's snapshots of a healthy family, and that's what we're going to do. And today's going to be like this broad overview, just some quick snapshots of what a healthy family looks like in the Old Testament and kind of in the New Testament too, that biblical framework, if you will, for a family. And what's really neat about it is that these are things that can apply to anybody. that's in your family. So caveat, this today and next week, when we talk about family, we're not restricting it to any particular dynamic or setup. We're going to use the word family for anybody who lives under your roof. Anybody that you're living with, because if you're anything like us, there's a little bit of a blended dynamic going on in family. So that's how we're using this idea. Fair? Makes sense? Okay, the first snapshot comes from a couple named Adam and Eve. And this is a really beautiful story. And if you've been around church for a while, this is maybe the most well-known story outside of anything to do with Jesus, the idea of Adam and Eve. And I don't know what they look like, so I got a stained glass version of them, kind of a cartoonish version of them up here. Maybe it's them, I don't know. But we're going to be talking about Adam and Eve. And what's really interesting is that something profound happens in this story. And I think there's layers to it. We're going to look at a snapshot right now. The idea of Adam and Eve is that God created everything. And then he creates this guy. And he had already created everything else, and he creates this guy. And he looks around, and there's not really a match for him. So he looks around and he's like, this isn't good. And everything that he had created, he had looked at it, he had taken a step back and just looked, and you could imagine, or maybe you can't imagine, I don't know, that's probably not good wording, of what it's like to be God and look at the stuff you just created. And you're like, that's good. That's the way I want it. That's how it operates. That's going to function really well. And he looks around, and Adam's just hanging out with everything else, and he says, that's not good for this man to be alone. That's fascinating. Because the very first form of community that God created was a family. The very first form of community that God created was a family. And we'll get to this as we get to know each other a little better and on into next year. But it's really interesting to consider that one of the reasons you and I are so dependent upon community now as adults, where we talk about, I need community. I need accountability. I need someone to help me sort through. It could be that we need that now as adults because we didn't get some of the stuff we should have gotten as children. So what are some healthy snapshots of family? One, it's not good to be alone. So you're in this family. You're with other people. So God creates a suitable helper for this guy. And you could argue, and I've read some contemporary commentators, and it's really neat how they kind of play on words here. But literally, Eve was built. And she was built for this guy. So regardless of who you're here with, there is no other form of companionship that can replace another person in your life. That type of community, that family dynamic is integral to our existence. That's fascinating. So when I'm working with couples who are about to cross that marriage threshold, and they're talking about their family, they're talking about where they want to go, they're talking about extended family coming together as one, it's really interesting to consider that one day you go to bed and you wake up the next morning, you go about your life. Then the next night you go to bed and you wake up, your head pops off that pillow, and you're married. It's different. Everything's different. And the thought that we have to wrap our minds around is that that person beside of you now becomes the most important person on the planet for you. No one else transcends importance other than that person beside of you. You've got to get that. So there's a couple of threats. I mean, here's a suitable helper, but some of us with miles on our marriage, this is where you and I, we need to step in to those who are getting ready to take their next steps in their relationship and help coach and guide and listen and help work through, because you know as well as I do that there's some threats to this idea. There's some big threats to the idea to where Michelle becomes the most important person on the planet to me. Well, there's threats with personal issues. Maybe we haven't sorted through. Maybe we're unaware of. And then there's this caveat, and we'll get into this more a little bit next week. The idea of in-laws. And I know we all chuckle with that, like the mother-in-law stigma and all that, right? It's funny and everything. But you think about it. It's hard to have a relationship work out where you have other people who feel that they're just as important as the person that you're spending the rest of your life with. So God creates this suitable helper for Adam, and it's for this reason. He like takes this rib, the side thing and all that. And if you've been around church for a while, you know that story. And that's why the author says it's for this reason that they leave one another and they're united to one another. And this may be the problem that some of us are experiencing now. The idea of leaving, it actually means to loosen and to depart. And maybe that's where some of us feel friction in our family. You're married, or you're with this individual, or you're trying to move into this dynamic, but you haven't loosened some of the other relationships enough. You haven't actually departed. And in the ancient world, just like today, if you leave that dynamic that you grew up in, if you leave that family culture that you grew up in, well, sometimes you feel like you're losing a sense of security or identity. And yes, that's part of the point, because you're going to be creating something different. And the idea of being united, some authors would say it's like leaving and cleaving. United, it means to join or to pursue. And this lifelong pursuit of another person, the person who is the most important person on the planet for you. And that's where a threat comes in also. Maybe that's where the friction or the tension is for some of you this morning. There's not enough loosening. There hasn't been a departure. There hasn't been some boundaries created. There's not been this full embrace that I'm now joined to this person. I'm not pursuing them. So when I read this, the thing that I use a lot is, this is the idea of creating and maintaining. And I kid you not, every single marital issue, every single family issue we bring, you can form them into one of these two things. Either the group, the family, the husband, the wife, whoever's involved in the family, they haven't created. There's not been this leaving. They haven't created this intentional family culture. Or they have, and then over time, pursuing it has stopped. So you haven't maintained it. You've lowered your guard. You've leaned into something else. So creating and maintaining this is so important, because notice this snapshot of what it creates. Both of them were naked, and they felt no shame. Verse 25. Isn't that amazing? I mean, you get a snapshot of yourself today, right? You ever do those pictures where you're going through your phone, you're looking at pictures, and you're like, I hear this from my girls all the time. Oh, I hate that picture. Or Michelle, oh, delete that. Yeah, I don't like that picture. You know, think about this. They're both so stinking vulnerable right now. And there's no shame. And you think about this moment right now with the people you do family with. And are there any experiences that are happening, or past experiences that are playing out in the present with your emotions that just stir up shame for you? Well, that's why we're talking about these snapshots of what a healthy relation or a healthy family culture looks like. But you know as well as I do, if you know this story, that this level of transparency, it tanks. And it tanks quickly. And what happens is this blame game evolves, where one person makes a mistake and they don't want to take full responsibility for it. So they're like, hey, wait, it was actually your fault. And then you hear that and you're like, wait, hold up. No, you were there first. This is your fault. And it just spirals out of control. But a snapshot of the healthy family is that, wow, this vulnerability, this transparency is there. And there's no shame. And I don't know about you, but where I'm from, it seems like there's this culture that exists in family where it's so easy for someone to throw some verbal grenades over the wall so that you can create a sense of shame or guilt or fault in the other person's life. The other person or the other people who should be so valuable and important to you. That's a big deal. So the second one is, second snapshot, Abraham and Sarah. And it's really interesting when you step into their story. Like if you're reading Genesis, chapters 1 through 11 is like this big picture. You're talking global, if you will. You're talking about the creation of humanity, the creation of the world, the big flood that we talk about, that idea of Tower of Babel where people are dispersed over the land at the time. And you're talking about everybody on the planet. And then chapter 12, you turn the page and you start reading chapter 12, and there's just this laser focus on this guy named Abram. We come to know him as Abraham, but his name is Abram. And you're reading through his story and you see that God is choosing to use this one guy to reorient, restructure his idea of redemption. There's some stuff that's off. So he taps Abram on the shoulder and says, hey, this is what I want you to do. And this is a beautiful thought, and maybe some of you wrestle with this right now. He taps Abram on the shoulder and he says, hey, listen, I want to use you. And I want to use you in a very profound way. I'm actually going to use you, and I'm going to create this ripple effect in your descendants that is eventually going to reach down through the centuries to I'll do this. So Abram actually leaves. He leaves the family business. He leaves the family land, and he's taking his wife with him. You read through this story, and we don't want to dismiss any of the theology, but sometimes when you're reading through the pages of Scripture, if you're anything like me, you read through it, and it's like that stuff has happened immediately. And you forget that there's years or months in between these stories or these pages. Or you read it, and it's like, oh, this is the big idea, and that's all I focus on. But when you read the nuances or the layers of the story, it's like, wow, that's so stinking tangible or applicable or practical for my life. So time goes on, and God creates a couple of covenants with Abram. And one is just kind of a rededication. That's a word we use in church, right? Just rededication. Are you really up for this? Because we're about to take it to the next level, so are you all in? And then another covenant is kind of reinforcing this whole scope of what's going on. And the beautiful thing when he creates this covenant is that Sarah is brought along. You're really not reading about her. So God creates this covenant with Abram. And then he says, this covenant is very important, so important that there's going to be a change. There's going to be a shift. I'm going to change your name. Your name is going to move from Abram to Abraham, and your wife Sarai to Sarah. And that's beautiful because this is like the first powerful moment where Sarah is brought along with this because she's in this covenant. And you think about the covenant that some of us create with that most important person on the planet. And it's no longer just your life, even though God's doing some really cool stuff in your life or in your business or in the way you operate in community. But he's also bringing your spouse too. She's right along with him. And maybe that's part of the tension in some of our families. And this snapshot is beautiful because sometimes we enter into covenant with someone. But do we fully express that? Do we really bring them along? Are there the necessary changes taking place because of what is happening between those living in our family? So, little time goes on. I think we touched on this once before, but this is a really interesting story. If you saw the picture of Abraham and Sarah, you saw that they had a little age on them because when God drops this dream into Abram's mind, he's 75. And they start asking some questions just like we would. It's like, hold up. We're going to have a child. You know I'm 75 and Sarah's tagging along right behind me, right? So we're going to have a child. And God's like, yeah, just it'll be a little bit. You know, you're going to have a child. Just be patient. Well, the child is born that God promised when Abraham is 100. Isn't that amazing? 25 years go by before this promise plays out. And it's a reminder that God doesn't work on the same time frame that we do, and maybe you and your spouse work on the opposite time frames. And timing can be a big tension. But it's really interesting because if you're not good at waiting, anybody good at waiting? Okay, yeah, good. You're being honest. Okay, we're all being honest here. Anybody good at waiting? No, we're not good at waiting. But that's not a bad thing. Being bad at waiting is probably... yeah, it makes sense. It's as it should be. I heard someone say waiting is eagerly impatient. And waiting, you're not good at it because it's not something that should happen. The idea of patience is active and it's deliberate. Like you know there's going to be a gap between here and here. So I'm deliberate with my time. And I'm active with what I do until this comes to fruition. Waiting is passive. And it's dangerous. I mean, we wait for the promotion or we wait for the job, or we wait for our family to expand, or we wait for resolution to a conflict. Or in the case of Sarah and Abraham, some time goes on, and I don't know about you, but if I'm 75 and God says, hey, this is a promise, around year 77, 78, I've got questions. And I'm probably tapping out. I'm done. Like, really? And maybe that's where we get into these questions like, is there really a God? Did he really say this? I mean, what's going on here? And think, you're 85? 90? 99? And it's about to happen? And you've got one more year to go, but you've been at this for 29 years? It's like, will this ever change? So some point during that downtime of those 25 years, Sarah has an idea because she's like us. She's not good at waiting. She's like, oh, here's what we'll do. We'll speed it up. We'll speed up this process. So we've got Hagar. She's our helping hand. Abram, why don't you go sleep with her, have a baby with her, and we'll get this thing rolling. And Abram, like a typical guy, not to be crude, is like, great idea. And I mean, he rolls with it. He rolls with it. But notice Sarah's language. Perhaps. I mean, maybe this will work. Perhaps. Waiting's dangerous. That's why we've got to be patient with the people that we're doing life with, especially when they live under our roof, because waiting, it can create some very unhealthy and damaging effects. So a little time goes on, and this comes to fruition. There's a child that's born. It's not the child of the promise. It's a child a path that they have created unnecessarily. And there's some strain and tension on the relationship, and it reaches a point. And Sarah looks at Abram. This was her idea. Sarah looks at Abraham and says, this is all your fault. That's crazy, isn't it? And you're laughing because there's truth in it. And maybe you've experienced that. And that blame game is cycling back. This is a big problem. So when you're waiting, there's this great tool that I've been using for years. And it helps me and it helps Michelle. There's sometimes when she and I, we've had a little tension or friction going on, and literally she has just made this motion, not even with her full hand, just her finger. And when she does it, and it's not what you're thinking, okay? All right, it's a different finger, all right? She makes this motion with her finger, and when she does it, I have two thoughts every single time that pops in my mind. One, I'm so stinking proud of you because exactly that's what we talk about. That's what we should be doing. We agreed on this. And number two, I'm like, why are you doing that before me? You beat me to this punch. But usually we have some kind of stimulus, and it just sends us off into wherever waiting takes us. We're just launched like an arrow into any random direction. And we say things and we do things that we regret. But this little snapshot of health is simply this finger motion where you have this little curl. Can't you just see her doing that if she's right? That right there. And it's that little circle where you take a step back, or you take a deep breath, or you take a time out as an adult, and you get clear in your mind and you sort through what's happening, how you're feeling, how you want to deal with this. In other words, it's a way of being less reactive, where you just go anywhere, and more responsive, where you're intentional, you're deliberate, you're patient. Now you're thinking, okay, I thought this was a snapshot of a healthy family, and this is kind of tanking with Abram and Sarah. Well, the beautiful thing is there's some more tension, and I think that's one reason I love these Bible stories. They're real. It's not just a fairy tale where everything always works out. No, there can be some roller coaster instances, just like I experienced with Michelle with me, and Abraham and Sarah and Abraham, and you with people in your family. So some time goes on, and there's still some tension lingering, but it's like Sarah's sorting through some stuff, and she's getting clear in her own heart and mind. And she's like, you know what? We need to bounce back to the promise of God. We've just got to bounce back there. That was the plan all along. We strayed. We messed it up. We took it into our own hands. We should have followed through. We should have created. and then maintained this idea, and we didn't. So she starts talking some sense into Abraham, and he doesn't like the direction. It's emotional for him. He's struggling with some of these decisions because it's going to affect the child that he had with Hagar, the helping hand. Sarah doesn't really have a dog in that fight. But that child is Abraham's son. So now what do? Well, what she's talking about, it makes sense in the overarching scheme of things. So Abram's wrestling with it. And then God prompts this right here. He comes and he's working in Sarah's heart and mind. He's working with Abraham. And then he comes and he says, listen. And listen to your wife. Sorry, guys. Listen to your wife. So regardless of what you've been through and who was wrong or whatever, there's still this forward motion, and that's one of the snapshots of a healthy family. You keep moving forward. There's going to be some bad days. There's going to be some bad stuff. There's going to be some tension. And based on who you live with, where you live and where you are in your season of life, it's going to be different than you and me. And it's just going to be what we have to deal with, our realities. But it's going to happen. And this idea of slowing down so that you can listen is so stinking beautiful. And I'm not one of these guys. I have a very cautious way about me. Like, I'll probably never come to any of you and say, God told me to tell you. I'm just cautious with that. And if you come to me and say, God told you to tell me something, I'm going to be cautious with that too. In the New Testament church age, we've all been given the Holy Spirit. So God is working in all of our hearts and minds. So there can be some affirmation and confirmation, but speaking directly to us is part of this new covenant that we talk about in the New Testament. However, caveat, when it comes to the people that I live with every single day, when my wife or my children come to me and they say, listen, and they really want me to hear them, I listen. And I listen as fully as I possibly can. And I want you to know, as a pastor, people let me into their lives, and I've come to this conclusion over the past 2 decades. If there's a void in humanity, it's this. We don't have someone who will simply listen to what we're saying. I mean, do you have that? Maybe you do, and you don't have to answer. But do we have someone who will authentically listen to what is being said? Someone to hear us. And sometimes no strings attached. Just to listen. It's one of the biggest voids in humanity. That's probably why some spouses go to their friends instead of their spouse. That's why there's a lot of talk about your family, but not talk to or with your family. Some time ago, several years ago, I was just having this little rocky time in life, and I don't know how it was spilling over into the other relationships in the family. I just remember exactly where we were. I'm in the passenger seat, Michelle's driving, and we're going down this small road. The children are small, they're in the back. I'm trying to sort through some stuff, and I just remember Michelle saying, you know what, David, I really think you need to talk with someone. And she meant some kind of professional kind of deal. And it hit me, listening to her voice and her tone, and that tone of Michelle Green's voice, and the way she used the words, and it just went right into my heart. And I said, I think you're right. I pulled out a phone right then, Googled Christian counselors in Lexington, Kentucky. First name popped up, had 5-star reviews, called, went, one of the best decisions ever. Maybe it's a really good opportunity for you when you're thinking about a snapshot of a healthy family to listen to what they're saying. It could be one of the best moves you ever make. Now I want us to finish with this, and I just want you to listen. Okay? You see how I did that? See how I set you up? Now you have to. I just want you to listen. And I know there's sometimes, like when we go out as a family, I do this thing where I turn the phone sideways. We're going to take a selfie. And it started out funny because I just couldn't get everybody in. So half my head's cut off and I'm in these weird positions. Now it's turned into like a fan fave and we love it. And I always take pictures like that. And the kids will say, hey, do the half head thing. So all of my photos of family selfies, you can see about right here up. Okay, that's it. That's who I am, just creeping into that photo. So we'll go through those sometimes and sorting through, and like I told you earlier, the kids are like, no, delete that when you have multiple copies. I don't like the way I look in that. And no, I don't like that one, so let's get rid of that picture. And when we come face to face with Scripture sometimes, it's a snapshot of health and beauty. And as you're reading through it, it's like, wait, I don't know if I like the way I look in that. So just listen. There's this beautiful teaching in Ephesians 5, and there's nuances to it that sometimes we've missed as the church. You're reading through and you come to chapter 5, and there's this statement that says, submit to one another. And that's how the text starts, to one another. And that idea of submit means to come under someone. So the church is called to submit to each other, to come under one another in an essence of humility and love and service. So that some of your needs become ways that I can serve you. I can meet those needs. I'm coming under you regardless of who you are. And then typically our Bibles make a transition there. And there's a subheading that sends us off into an erroneous way of reading this. And it's about wives simply being submissive to husbands, which leads to an idea that women are submissive to men. And I think that takes away from the context of what this is teaching. So I want you to listen just for a second, because I will go to my grave believing that if this dynamic, this reciprocal dynamic is at work in your family, the people under your roof, they will respond to it in the most profoundly positive ways possible. So, wives, yes, you're submitting, but you're not submitting to just any random man in the church. I mean, I'll fight you. Michelle is under no other dude in this room. She, forgive me for this language if this bothers you, she's mine. She belongs to me. And if there's any submission, it's me. It's not any other random person. So wives, yeah, you submit to your husbands, but you're not just submitting to them because they're male. Listen to what you're submitting to. Husbands, and this is a high calling. You love your wives just as Christ loved the church. Well, how did he do that? He gave himself up for her. Ladies, that's the kind of love that should be in your mind and emotion in your home. He gave himself up for her to make her holy, to cleanse her, to wash her through the word, to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or blemish, holy and blameless, her best interest always in mind. And in this same way, husbands, you love your wives sacrificially. It's not just about you, and it's not about you because you're a guy. It's about you because of what you're representing in this relationship, where that person is the most important person on the planet to you. After all, no one hated his own body, so how dare us behave in a way to where it looks like we're hating our wives. But you feed and you care for your wife just as Christ does for the church. And wives, you respect your husband. I tell you, if I feel disrespected in the home, it's not that I get frustrated. It's not that I get angry. I get lost. If I feel disrespected, I'm out of sorts. No compass can get me on the right path or track. I feel destroyed. But if I feel that my wife and my children have a sense of respect for me, I feel like I can bust through a wall. I'll do anything and everything for them. And you get into that cycle. where there's this consistency of sacrificial love, there's going to be people who respond to that. They'll respect the snot out of that. And then when you feel respected with the people you live with, you'll do anything for them. And as you're doing anything for them, they're just going to respect you even more. And as you feel that respect, you're going to do more for them. And you're going to start having this beautiful, healthy, Christ-focused family. And that's what he says. He says, this is a profound mystery. And there's nuances and layers to this we don't have the time to talk about right now that really speak to modern society. But he says this is a profound mystery. But what I want you to focus on is that I'm not just talking about husbands and wives. I'm talking about Christ and his church. The stakes are high when it comes to family. And it's the very first form of community that God created. And that's why it's worthy of every single ounce of our energy to move forward and get some of this stuff right. Fair? Father, thank you for the way you love us. Help us to put that same kind of love in motion, to represent you and to lead and love the people that we share a life with. God, you are so, and we're thankful for it. And as always, we use the name of Jesus to thank you and to praise you. Amen.